She was born illegitimate, abandoned by her father, raised by nuns in a stone-walled orphanage in rural France, wearing black and white uniforms, sleeping in cold dormitories, learning to sew hems on bedsheets because there was nothing else to do. She had no money, no family connections, no formal education, and no last name that opened any doors. She was a cafe singer, and not even a particularly good one. You would think someone like that could never set foot inside the world of high fashion, let alone reshape it forever. Well, Gabrielle Bonheur Chanel, the woman the world would come to know simply as Coco, built one of the most powerful fashion empires in human history. She became the only fashion designer ever named to Time magazine's list of the 100 most influential people of the 20th century. She created Chanel No. 5, a perfume that has been sold every 30 seconds for over 100 years. She invented the little black dress. She gave women the freedom to move in their own clothes. And she did it all starting from nothing. Literally nothing. So how did a poor orphan girl from rural France become the most iconic name in luxury fashion? To find out, we have to go back to August 19, 1883, in a small market town called Saumur, in the Loire Valley of France. Gabrielle Chanel was born into a life that offered very little promise. Her father, Albert Chanel, was a street vendor, a traveling peddler who sold small goods at market fairs across the French countryside. Her mother, Jeanne de Vol, was a laundry woman. They were not married when Gabrielle was born, which in late 19th century France carried a social stigma that followed a child like a shadow for the rest of their life. The family would eventually grow to 6 children, all of them living in poverty, moving from one small town to the next as Albert chased whatever business he could scrape together at the markets. There was no stability, there was no comfort. There was just survival and movement, and the constant low hum of not having enough. Picture this for a second. A family constantly on the move, no stable home. A father who was more absent than present. A mother exhausted by hard labor and too many children. This was Gabrielle's world in her earliest years. But even then, she was perceptive in a way that set her apart. She watched everything. She absorbed detail. She had an eye for the way things looked and felt and fit that went far beyond her years. And she developed a hunger, a deep consuming hunger for something better that would never ever leave her. Then in 1895, when Gabrielle was just 11 years old, everything got dramatically worse. Her mother, Jeanne, died of bronchitis at the age of 32. Worn out by hard work and a hard life, she was gone before Gabrielle was old enough to really know her. Albert Chanel, faced with 5 children he could not or would not care for, made a decision that would define Gabrielle's entire life. He put his 2 sons to work as farm laborers, and he took his 3 daughters, Gabrielle, Julia Berthe, and Antoinette, to the convent of Aubezine, a remote abbey run by the Congregation of the Sacred Heart of Mary, deep in the Corrèze region of central France. He dropped them off at the door, and then he disappeared. Gabrielle Chanel never saw her father again. She would spend the next 7 years inside those walls. The orphanage at Aubezine was austere, in every sense of the word. The stone building stood on a plateau surrounded by forest. The walls inside were whitewashed. The dormitory doors were painted black. The girls wore identical white blouses and black skirts. Every single day followed the same rigid schedule. Early mass before dawn, then classes, then chores, then silence, then prayers, then sleep. Gabrielle hated every minute of it. She hated kneeling in the cold abbey. She hated the relentless routine. She invented elaborate stories to tell the priest in confession just to give herself something to say. She was, by nature, too alive for those walls. But something remarkable happened inside that orphanage. Two things, actually, that would shape the entire course of her life. The first was sewing. It started as obligatory labor, hemming sheets, mending linens, tasks the nuns assigned to all the girls. But Gabrielle's hands turned out to be extraordinarily gifted. What the others found tedious, she found satisfying. Her fingers understood fabric in a way that seemed almost instinctive. What began as punishment would become the foundation of everything she would ever build. The second was observation. The stained glass windows of Aubazine were decorated with an unusual motif, interlocking loops and geometric shapes repeating in elegant, hypnotic patterns. Gabrielle stared at those windows for 7 years. She memorized their rhythm. She internalized their logic. Years later, when she designed her now famous WWII monogram, the symbol recognized in every country on Earth, many fashion historians would point directly back to those orphanage windows. Even her most iconic logo carried the shadow of her hardest years. She also read, secretly and voraciously. During holidays, visiting relatives in Moulins and Varennes, she and her beloved aunt Adrienne, who was almost the same age and became more like a sister than an aunt, would tear romance novels out of newspapers published in installments. The stories were always the same theme: poor girls who through cleverness and beauty and sheer will became rich, elegant ladies. Gabrielle later said that those novels taught her about life and that they nourished her sensibility and her pride. She smuggled the books back to Aubazine, hidden in her notebook, forbidden under the convent's strict rule. Once her teacher found them and made her confess. Even as a child, Gabrielle Chanel was already trying to rewrite the story she had been handed at birth. At 18, she left Aubazine. She earned a charity scholarship to a boarding school in Moulins, run by the Sisters of Notre Dame, where she reconnected with family members and began to step into the world. During the day, she worked as a seamstress and a sales assistant in a tailor's shop. At night, she sang at cafes. Let me be honest, she was not a gifted singer. She had presence, she had charisma. She could hold a room with her dark eyes and her quick wit and her complete lack of self-consciousness. But the voice itself was nothing remarkable. What she had was the ability to make an audience feel like she was performing only for them. She sang 2 songs on heavy rotation at the local café La Rotonde, Coco Rico, a song about a rooster's crow, and Qui a vu Coco, meaning, has anyone seen Coco, about a young girl looking for her lost dog in Paris. The audiences loved the energy, loved the wit, loved this girl who sang about being lost and laughed about it. They started calling her Coco, and the name stuck with her for the rest of her life. Coco Chanel. The name sounds like destiny now. At the time, it was just a cafe nickname for an orphan girl who couldn't quite carry a tune. It was at those cafe performances that Coco's life pivoted in an unexpected direction. Around 1906, she met Etienne Balsan, a wealthy ex-cavalry officer and heir to a textile manufacturing fortune, who was immediately charmed by this sharp-tongued, fearless, unconventional young woman. He invited Coco to come and stay at his estate, a grand chateau called Royalieu near Compiègne, surrounded by forested equestrian paths and the easy pleasures of aristocratic life. Coco, with very few other options and absolutely no interest in staying small, accepted. And here is where Coco Chanel showed the first real glimpse of who she truly was. She did not passively enjoy Balsan's wealth. She did not simply relax into the comfort of his social circle and count herself lucky to have escaped poverty. She studied everything. She watched with those extraordinary eyes exactly how the elite dressed, how they moved, what they valued, what they actually needed versus what they thought they needed. She understood that truly powerful people rarely announce their power with excess, and she began to quietly rebel against all the excess she saw around her. While the aristocratic women around her wore elaborate corseted gowns, layers upon layers of ruffles, and enormous decorated hats piled high with feathers and ribbons and artificial fruit, Coco wore simple, practical clothes. She borrowed freely from Balsan's own wardrobe. She put on his jerseys belted at the waist. She wore riding clothes and made them elegant simply by wearing them with absolute confidence. She started making her own hats, stripped down, clean, spare. And Balsan's wealthy friends began asking where on earth they could buy them. This was the beginning, not some grand business plan conceived in a notebook. Just a young woman with extraordinary taste, extraordinary instincts, and absolutely nothing to lose. However, Coco was not content to be anyone's mistress indefinitely. She was too independent for that, too proud, too driven. And it was through Balsan's social circle that she met the man who would change the entire trajectory of her life. Arthur Boy Capel was a British businessman, wealthy, educated, passionate about polo, deeply intellectual, and immediately and completely captivated by this remarkable young woman who dressed like no one he had ever encountered. Their connection was fast and electric, and, for Coco, unlike anything she had experienced before, Capel was, by all accounts, the great love of her life. And unlike Balsan, who simply enjoyed her company, Capel believed in her. He saw something in her vision that deserved to exist in the world. On January 1st, 1910, Boy Capel provided the financial backing for Coco to open her own shop. Chanel Modes, a tiny millinery boutique, opened at 21 Rue Cambon in Paris. That address would become one of the most famous in all of fashion history. But at the moment of its opening, it was just a small room with some hats in the window and a young woman who had never run a business in her life. Coco's hats were immediately, radically different. The prevailing fashion at the time called for elaborate constructions piled high with feathers, ribbons, fruits, flowers, and entire stuffed birds. Enormous theatrical headpieces that announced wealth and status through sheer excess. The bigger and more complicated the hat, the more prestigious the wearer. Coco's hats were the exact opposite. Clean lines, simple, elegant shapes, nothing unnecessary. They were hats that made the woman wearing them look more beautiful, rather than hats that competed with her for attention. And wealthy women noticed. Within months, celebrities, actresses, and society figures were walking into that tiny shop and leaving with something they had never seen before but immediately understood they needed. By 1912, a famous actress photographed wearing a Chanel hat created a wave of publicity that no amount of advertising money could have purchased. Coco was on her way. In 1913, Boy Capel encouraged Coco to think bigger. They were vacationing together in Deauville, a fashionable resort town on the Normandy coast, beloved by wealthy Parisians escaping the summer heat, and he backed her in opening a second boutique. But this one was different. This is where Coco Chanel began doing something that would fundamentally rewrite the rules of women's fashion. She started working with jersey. I need you to understand what jersey meant in 1913 to appreciate how audacious this was. Jersey was the fabric they used to make men's underwear. It was inexpensive, stretchy, considered cheap and low class, completely beneath the dignity of a fashionable woman. No serious designer touched it. No society woman would have been caught wearing it. But Coco had grown up in poverty. She had a practical mind untainted by what was supposed to be prestigious. She had worn simple, functional clothes her whole life and had learned that comfort and elegance were not enemies. She took this humble fabric and turned it into simple dresses, sweaters, and sailor blouses in navy and grey, clothes that women could actually breathe in, actually move in, actually live in. No corsets, no restriction, no suffering in the name of fashion. The wealthy women who vacationed in Deauville, women who spent their evenings crushed into elaborate corseted gowns that required a maid to lace them up and a doctor on call if they ate too much, tried on Coco's jersey separates, and they never went back to what they had worn before. Within 5 years, as one fashion publication noted, her poor girl look had attracted the attention of some of the most powerful women in Europe, seeking relief from the excesses of traditional couture. Here's what I think is so important to understand about this moment. Coco Chanel was not a trained designer. She had no formal education in fashion, no apprenticeship under a master couturier, no degree from any art school. What she had was a body that had always worn functional clothes out of necessity, and an eye that had always seen the difference between what was genuinely beautiful and what was merely expensive. She had grown up without the luxury of pretending that discomfort was elegance, and that poverty, that very specific lack, turned out to be the most powerful design credential she could possibly have had. She understood what women needed because she had always been one of the women who needed it most. However, success at that scale came with scrutiny, and Coco was still operating on Capel's money. She hated it. The dependency reminded her of the orphanage, of being a child without agency, subject to the decisions of others. She pushed harder. She worked longer hours. She hired more staff, refined her designs, expanded her vision. In 1915, she opened a third boutique in Biarritz on the Côte Basque, a resort town near the Spanish border that had become a refuge for wealthy Europeans displaced by the growing war in the north. And the timing, as it turned out, was extraordinary. World War I was raging across France and most of Europe, and with it came a transformation in women's lives that Coco had not planned for, but was uniquely positioned to meet. With luxury fabrics like silk and satin suddenly scarce and rationed for military use, and with women increasingly taking on work outside the home while men served at the front, the entire social and economic order of pre-war Europe was being shredded apart, and the demand for practical, functional, elegant clothing exploded. Women needed to move. They needed to work. They needed clothes that fit their actual lives, not the aristocratic fantasy the war was now destroying. Coco Chanel was the only major designer already building exactly that. Her jersey sportswear, her simple silhouettes, her rejection of unnecessary decoration, everything she had been doing out of pure instinct and personal taste suddenly became the answer to what the entire modern world needed. By 1916, her Biarritz operation alone was so profitable that Coco did something she had been waiting years to do. She repaid every single franc that Capel had ever invested in her business. She gave it back in full. From that moment forward, the House of Chanel was entirely her own. She was financially independent, exactly like the heroines in those forbidden novels she had smuggled back to Aubusine as a girl. It had taken her years, but she had done it. And yet success, for Coco Chanel, always seemed to arrive hand in hand with loss. On December 22, 1919, Boy Capel, the man who had believed in her before anyone else, the man who had provided her first opportunity and never stopped supporting her vision, the man she would always consider the great love of her life, was killed when a tire blew out on his car on the road between Cannes and Nice. He was 38 years old. They had not been together romantically for some time. Capel had married an English aristocrat the previous year, but the bond between them had never completely broken. "I lost everything with the loss of Capel," Coco would confess to a close friend years later. What followed was not a life of happiness. But here is what you need to understand about Coco Chanel. Grief, for her, was not permission to stop. It was fuel. She had grown up understanding that the world did not offer sympathy to women without money or family, that the only protection was achievement, that stopping meant falling back, and falling back meant the orphanage, the nuns, the uniforms, the whitewashed walls. She poured her devastation into work, and what she would build in the years immediately following Capel's death would make everything that came before look like a warm-up. By 1919, Chanel was established as a registered couturière, with her Maison de Couture at 31 Rue Cambon, the same street where she had opened that tiny hat shop nearly a decade before. Now she occupied an entire building. She employed hundreds of workers. She was dressing some of the most powerful women in Europe. The world was hers, but Coco wanted something more. Fashion, she understood, dressed a woman's body while she was in the room. What she wanted to create was something that would stay with a woman even after she left. Something invisible, intimate, impossibly elegant. She wanted to create a perfume. In 1921, she sat down with Ernest Beau, one of the most gifted perfumers in all of France. She told him exactly what she wanted, a scent that would smell like a woman, not a flower. At the time, every perfume on the market was built around a single dominant floral note: rose, jasmine, lily of the valley. Pretty, simple, conventional. Coco wanted something far more complex, something modern, something that did not announce itself but lingered, mysterious and unforgettable. Beau presented her with a series of samples numbered 1 through 10. When she reached the 5th vial, a revolutionary blend of jasmine, rose, and dozens of other notes combined with synthetic aldehydes that created a depth no natural perfume had ever achieved. She stopped. "Number 5, she said quietly. "That is what I was waiting for, Chanel." Number 5 launched in 1921 and immediately shattered every rule in the perfume world. The bottle alone was a revolution, a clean, simple, beveled rectangle with an understated stopper, at a time when every other perfume came in ornate, theatrical flacons designed to look precious on a vanity table. The name was just a number, no poetic French title, no romantic imagery, and the scent itself was unlike anything that had ever existed. Women who had never spent money on perfume before bought it. Women who already owned every other luxury perfume wanted it too. It sold by word of mouth, by obsession, by the kind of irrational loyalty that only truly extraordinary things inspire. Chanel No. 5 would become the financial backbone of the entire Chanel empire for the next 100 years. It has never stopped selling. A bottle has been purchased somewhere in the world every 30 seconds, every day since 1921. In 1925, Coco introduced the Chanel suit, a collarless cardigan jacket with braid trim paired with a simple, graceful skirt. It was the antithesis of everything high fashion had previously demanded. Practical, comfortable, unquestionably elegant. The kind of thing a woman could wear to a board meeting, and then to dinner, and then to the theater, and always feel exactly right, not overdressed, not underdressed, just herself. Fashion critics called it too simple. Society women bought it anyway, because their bodies told them it was exactly what they had been waiting for. Then, in October 1926, she did something that seemed almost deliberately provocative. She debuted the little black dress. Black at the time was the color of mourning, of funerals, of grief. No fashionable woman wore it by choice. But American Vogue published a photograph of Coco's design and called it Chanel's Ford, comparing it to the Model T automobile for its simplicity, its accessibility, and its radical democratic appeal. Every woman could wear it. Every woman, regardless of her shape or station, could look magnificent in it. The little black dress became, within years, what one fashion writer called a uniform for smart women between the wars, and it has never gone out of style. 100 years on, it is still the first thing a woman reaches for when she does not know what else to wear. By the early 1930s, Coco Chanel was one of the wealthiest self-made women on earth. She was worth a fortune she had built entirely from scratch, starting from a tiny hat shop backed by a borrowed loan. Picasso was her friend. Igor Stravinsky had lived in her home. The Duke of Westminster had tried and failed to make her his wife. She had Hollywood studios calling from California. She had journalists following her every move. She had gone from wearing the orphan's uniform to being the woman who decided what the whole world would wear. And then, the war came for her. In September 1939, Germany invaded Poland, and World War II swept across Europe. Coco Chanel closed the House of Chanel, dismissing hundreds of employees, and retreated to her apartment at the Paris Ritz Hotel. What followed during the Nazi occupation of Paris is still debated by historians, and deeply uncomfortable in every telling. Coco entered into a romantic relationship with a German officer. Evidence emerged decades later suggesting she had some level of collaboration with German military intelligence. Her anti-Semitism, troubling and documented, led her to try to use the occupation's laws to dispossess the Wertheimer family, the Jewish business partners who controlled production of Chanel No. 5, arguing the company should be taken from them. She was arrested after the liberation of Paris in 1944. She was questioned, then released, never charged, and told essentially to leave. She fled to Switzerland. For nearly a decade, she stayed there in quiet exile, largely out of the public eye. France did not want her. The fashion world had moved on without a single backward glance. Christian Dior had launched his new look in 1947, with dramatically cinched waists, padded busts, and full theatrical skirts, and critics called it the greatest fashion revolution since Chanel herself had invented sportswear. Women, the world said, wanted to look like women again. The pendulum had swung back to everything Coco had spent her life fighting against. It seemed, to everyone who cared to notice, that Coco Chanel's chapter was permanently closed. Or so everyone thought. February 5, 1954. Coco Chanel was 70 years old, an age at which most people have long settled into whatever life they have. She had been out of the fashion industry for 15 years. Her name in France still carried the words Nazi collaborator, like a wound that had not healed and showed no sign of healing. The Wertheimer family, the very people she had tried to dispossess during the war, had quietly agreed to finance her comeback, a decision that says everything about business and almost nothing about forgiveness. She had no PR firm working to rehabilitate her image, no calculated media strategy, no sympathetic journalist profile to soften the ground ahead of her. She had no young team of assistants coaching her on what was currently fashionable or what the market was looking for. She simply walked back into her atelier at 31 Rue Cambon, sat down in front of a mannequin, and began to work. The same way she had always worked, the only way she knew. When her comeback collection debuted that February, the French press was merciless. Critics savaged it. They called it dated. They said she was clinging to the past. One major publication dismissed the entire collection as a fiasco. The French fashion establishment, much of it built on the innovations she herself had pioneered, turned its collective back on her. But the American press saw something entirely different. Bettina Ballard, the influential editor of American Vogue, remained loyal to Chanel and featured the collection with obvious enthusiasm. American women, exhausted by the theatrical restrictions of the new look, and craving the comfort and ease and quiet elegance that Chanel had always offered, fell immediately and completely in love. British women followed. The Chanel suit moved. The quilted handbag she reintroduced, which she would name the 255 for its launch date of February 1955, became one of the most coveted objects in the world. Hollywood embraced her. Audrey Hepburn wore Chanel. Elizabeth Taylor wore Chanel. The Neiman Marcus Award arrived in 1957. The comeback was not a polite diplomatic success. It was a complete and total triumph. She worked every single day, into her 80s, designing, fitting, cutting, adjusting, starting over when something was not right. She was reportedly still preparing her next collection in the final week of her life. Fashion is not something that exists in dresses only, she said. Fashion is in the sky, in the street. Fashion has to do with ideas, the way we live, what is happening. On the evening of January 10, 1971, Coco Chanel returned from a Sunday drive through the Paris streets she had known for 60 years. She went to bed at the Ritz Hotel, the same hotel she had lived in for over 3 decades. She died in her sleep at the age of 87, still at work, still moving forward. Today, Chanel is one of the most valuable luxury brands on earth, estimated at over $20 billion. Chanel No. 5 remains the world's best-known perfume more than a century after its launch. The interlocked WWII monogram, inspired, many fashion historians believe, by the repeating geometric patterns in the stained glass windows of the orphanage where Gabrielle Chanel spent 7 of the loneliest years of her childhood, is recognized in every country on the planet. The Chanel suit, the little black dress, the quilted handbag, the jersey sweater, the costume jewelry, the bobbed hair, the suntan as a symbol of freedom rather than labor. All of it, every piece, traces back to one woman. One woman from an orphanage in rural France who had nothing, and who used that nothing as her starting point rather than her ending one. Which is remarkable, I think you'll agree, when you consider where she started. An abandoned girl in a black and white uniform, hemming bed sheets by candlelight and smuggling romance novels about poor girls who became elegant ladies. She was not supposed to be anything. She had no money, no connections, no name that opened doors, no father who came back for her, no one in the world who had a plan for her future. The world she eventually conquered was not built for people like her. The gatekeepers of that world, the editors and aristocrats, and socialites and established fashion houses, had constructed it specifically to keep people like her out. The boundaries were clear, the class system was real, and Coco Chanel walked through every single one of those walls as if they had been built from paper. When asked about her life, Coco Chanel once said, "My life didn't please me, so I created my life." And that, I think, is the whole story in 9 words. She did not wait for permission. She did not accept the narrative that had been written for her at birth. She looked at what she had, an extraordinary eye, hands that had learned to sew in an orphanage, a mind that understood what women actually needed from their clothes. And she built something the world had never seen before and has never forgotten since. Coco Chanel's legacy isn't really about fashion at all, not at its deepest level. It's about what happens when someone refuses to be confined by their circumstances. She was an illegitimate child, an orphan, a cafe singer, a mistress, a collaborator, an exile, and then a comeback that defied every expectation the world had for a woman of 70. Every label the world tried to pin on her, she transformed into raw material. The poverty taught her practicality and stripped her design eye clean of unnecessary sentimentality. The orphanage gave her discipline and an aesthetic vocabulary she would draw on for the rest of her life. The grief over Boy Capel taught her that the only honest answer to devastation was work. the Nazi scandal and the years of Swiss exile taught her that it was never, ever too late to walk back into the room and begin again, and that the room in question was always 31 Rue Cambon, where everything had started. The little girl who read forbidden novels in an attic bedroom in Varennes about poor girls becoming rich and elegant eventually wrote herself into a much bigger story than any of those novels ever dared contain. She didn't just enter the world of luxury, she redefined what luxury meant, stripping it of its vulgarity and its excess and its discomfort, and replacing all of that with something far more powerful: simplicity, quality, and ease. And more than 100 years later, that vision endures, stitched into every Chanel jacket, bottled in every vial of No. 5, carried in every quilted bag, flashed in every interlocked C that catches the light on a Paris street. Proof that where you come from has absolutely nothing to do with where you are capable of going. And proof that sometimes the people who have the least to start with end up building the most enduring things of all.